fix it with? Dear Liza, with what shall I fill it with? Dear Liza, with what? With straw. Dear Henry, with straw. Dear Henry, with straw. The straw is too long, dear Liza, the straw is too long, dear Liza, too long. So cut it, dear Henry, then cut it, dear Henry, then cut it. With what shall I cut it with? Dear Liza, with what shall I cut it with? Dear Liza, with what? With an axe, dear Henry, with an axe, dear Henry, with an axe. The axe is too dull, dear Liza, the axe is too dull, dear Liza, too dull. So sharpen it, dear Henry, then sharpen it, dear Henry, then sharpen it. With what shall I sharpen it with? Dear Liza, with what shall I sharpen it with? Dear Liza, with what? With a stone, dear Henry, with a stone, dear Henry, with a stone. The stone is too dry, dear Liza, the stone is too dry, dear Liza, too dry. So wet it, dear Henry, so wet it, dear Henry, so wet it. With what shall I wet it with? Dear Liza, with what shall I wet it with? Dear Liza, with what? With water, dear Henry, with water, dear Henry, with water. With what shall I fetch it with? Dear Liza, with what shall I fetch it with? Dear Liza, with what? With a bucket, dear Henry, with a bucket, dear Henry, with a bucket. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, there's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, a hole. So fix it, dear Henry, so fix it, dear Henry, so fix it. With what shall I fix it with? Dear Liza, with what shall I fill it with? Dear Liza, with what? With straw, dear Henry, with straw, dear Henry, with straw. The straw is too long, dear Liza, the straw is too long, dear Liza, too long. So cut it, dear Henry, then cut it, dear Henry, then cut it. With what shall I cut it with? Dear Liza, with what shall I cut it with? Dear Liza, with what? With an axe, dear Henry, with an axe, dear Henry, with an axe. The axe is too dull, dear Liza, the axe is too dull, dear Liza, too dull. So sharpen it, dear Henry, so sharpen it, dear Henry, so sharpen it. With what shall I sharpen it with? Dear Liza, with what shall I sharpen it with? Dear Liza, with what? With a stone, dear Henry, with a stone, dear Henry, with a stone. The stone is too dry, dear Liza, the stone is too dry, dear Liza, too dry. So wet it, dear Henry, so wet it, dear Henry, so wet it. With what shall I wet it with? Dear Liza, with what shall I wet it with? Dear Liza, with what? With water, dear Henry, with water, dear Henry, with water. With what shall I fetch it with? Dear Liza, with what shall I fetch it with? Dear Liza, with what? With a bucket, dear Henry, with a bucket, dear Henry, with a bucket. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, there's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza.